What's up, sons? It's Blind Run with Son of a Tech once again, and today we're going to be checking out the benchmarks for Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition, which is essentially 4K edition. So yeah, let's get this going.
Let's try it out.
To start things off, as always, we will go over the parts in the test bench, which is going to be an i7 7700K overclocked to 4.8 GHz, mated to an MSI Gaming M3 Z270 motherboard with 16 GB of DDR4 clocked at 2400 MHz. It is the Kingston Savage, and then of course we are running it on an M.200 or an M.2 drive, which is labeled M.200 from BioStar, but it is not NVMe protocol. It is SATA protocol, so it is only 500 read and write, nothing too special there. All of that's going to be powered by a Thermaltake 750 watt gold power supply. The benchmark run itself is going to be in Chapter 1, Part 2, and you will basically be in a building, and up to the left will be a device that you have to use the pull on to open the large bay doors. This is kind of where the game first opens up into all of the fun lighting. That's why I recommend getting to this point before running the benchmarks. Now you'll just go ahead and walk straight out and then turn to your right, and there will be about 3 enemies that you want to pull, kick, and shoot. Yes, this gets a little difficult and it's hard to keep consistent, I'm not gonna lie. Of course, you're gonna want to shoot the barrels to get some explosions in the benchmark, and then continue up and you will kill the vulture that comes flying out to end the benchmark. This should last about 60 seconds, and therefore all of our benchmarks are 60 seconds long, and they are, here's the settings, all in 4K. Now let's go over settings for a bit. Like I just mentioned, all of the benchmarks are going to be in 4K, yes, even for the RX 462GB and the GTX 1050. All of it's going to be at the highest available setting, which there's only 2 of pretty much. You're going to want to make sure to turn VSync or vertical sync off, and then there is a frame cap option, which is going to be 30, 60, 120, 144, and then like 240 at its max. So if you guys are looking for, you know, super high FPS refresh rate options, it does go really high. However, it's not uncapped. I'm pretty sure that if you had any sort of decent GPU, you're also going to be able to hit that. Once we get to the benchmarks, you'll see why. But let's talk about percent change in settings, and there's only 2 of them, like I mentioned. So the first one is going to be post-processing quality, which of course is going to provide the largest amount of improvement in frame rate, and as you can see here, we're going to be about a gain of 55.3%. So even if you guys are having some issues at playing the game in 4K on a lower end card, go ahead and try turning this all the way down first so you can keep the higher resolution. Moving on to texture quality, we only see about a 5% change, and the visual fidelity does drop quite a bit. So I'm going to recommend keeping this one on. So there's all about the test bench, the settings, and of course the benchmark run itself, all wrapped up in a nice, neat package for you guys to review, and of course scrutinize in the comment section below. But what numbers are we getting is the real question here. Well, let's hop into the benchmarks, and starting things off, we'll go from the bottom to the top, the least amount of frames to the most amount of frames, and we have the Power Color RX 462GB, and as you guys can see in parentheses, I have the driver version for all of these, and for AMD we have 17.4.1. We saw a minimum FPS on this card of 22 with an average of 25.38 and a max of 30 FPS. Now keep in mind this is at 4K, so you're going to have no problems playing this remake at lower resolutions. Of course, with a 50% gain, you would be above 30 FPS and playable in 4K if you just turned off the post-processing, which is pretty sweet for a $100 card. Of course, another $100 card is the Zotac GTX 1050, and the NVIDIA driver we're running for these tests is 378.49. We had a minimum FPS of 36 with an average of 40.32 and a max of 48. Its hyperactive brother, the Asus Dual GTX 1050 Ti, had a minimum FPS of 37 with an average of 44.5 and a max of 55. As I try not to crack in my voice anymore, we have the Sapphire RX 474GB, which had a minimum FPS of 42 with an average of 49.48 and a max of 61. Finally, we start getting closer to frame rates of 60 FPS in its average with the MSI RX 480 Gaming X Edition, with a minimum FPS of 51, an average of 58.43, and a max of 70. Unfortunately, we see that what's holding these cards back for this game in particular is not the video memory, with the EVGA GTX 1063GB beating out the 480 Gaming X, and it had a minimum of 55 with an average of 63.92 and a max of 78. Finally, if you want a 4K 60Hz experience, you're going to want to pick up the EVGA GTX 1060 Superclocked Edition, which of course is the 6GB model with a minimum FPS of 61, an average of 69.85, and a max of 83. Some final thoughts here. The game itself runs very well, and I don't think you're going to have any trouble picking this game up and playing it on a 4K panel. It does beg that question, is it okay to go ahead and upgrade your panel to 4K even if you're running on a mid-range to low-end graphics card? I think if you're really into kind of these remakes, for example, another one was the BioShock remake into 4K with those 4K options, and of course Halo Wars. Those are just two more that I can think up off the bat, and you want to experience them in 4K. I think there's nothing wrong with picking up a GTX 1060 or an RX 480 along with a 4K panel at this point, because the prices are dropping. That also gives you something to work towards on your personal rig and GPU upgrades in the future. I always recommend that you make sure you have a panel that is overspec'd compared to your system so you can grow into it. A good quality panel can definitely change your gaming experience more than a graphics card in some situations. And if you're looking at, like I said, playing things like Bulletstorm or BioShock or Halo Wars in 4K, and you're just wanting to reminisce with some extra features, I would argue that it might be time these days when you're getting panels under $300 for 4K. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And I did want to mention, just because I haven't enough recently, is that I do have a Patreon, and I do post all of the benchmark and settings review charts early on that Patreon just for patrons. It only costs $1 to get those charts early. And I do go ahead and watermark them now. That's just more for my benefit, to make sure that if you guys do repost them, it's fine and I still get some sort of credit for doing all the legwork. Wrapping things up, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next Tuesday.